What if I told you that a routine night shift in a quiet American town turned into the single most life-altering event of my career as a police officer? I know what you're probably thinking. Another wild UFO tale meant to grab attention. But I'm telling you this because every detail is burned into my memory, and I can't explain it away with logic or training. It began just after midnight on a stretch of highway that almost never saw traffic at that hour. I was parked off to the side, engine running low, filling out paperwork and listening to the steady hum of crickets outside. That's when the radio crackled with something unusual. Reports of strange lights above the old quarry several miles outside town. Normally, I'd chalk it up to teenagers with drones or maybe even fireworks. But the dispatcher's voice sounded nervous, like she couldn't quite believe what she was relaying. I decided to check it out, more out of curiosity than duty. The drive out there was eerie. The road twisted between dark pine trees, and the stars seemed unusually sharp, almost too bright. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the first anomaly. The car's dashboard lights flickered, dimmed, then glowed brighter than normal before settling. A weird static buzzed faintly through the radio, even though no one was speaking. By the time I reached the gravel road leading toward the quarry, my instincts told me this wasn't going to be just another false alarm. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the wide-open pit, moonlight reflecting off its shallow pools of water and the endless forest beyond. But then, in the distance, hovering low above the tree line, I caught sight of them. 3 glowing orbs moving in a way no aircraft should. They weren't blinking like planes, and they weren't drifting like balloons. They darted side to side, stopped suddenly, and then accelerated in impossible bursts. I got out of the cruiser and just stood there, mouth dry, trying to take it all in. That's when the silence hit me. The crickets, the wind, the distant sounds of water dripping. All of it had vanished, replaced by a deep, almost physical hum that seemed to vibrate inside my chest. The orbs grew brighter, merging into one luminous shape before descending slowly toward the quarry floor. Against every ounce of training and common sense, I followed, boots crunching on gravel as I made my way closer. The light wasn't just bright. It had texture, like liquid gold mixed with glass, shifting and flowing even as it held a steady shape. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. And then I saw them. At first, they were just silhouettes against the light, tall and slender, moving with a fluidity that didn't seem human. As they stepped forward, the glow softened, revealing figures that defied easy description. They weren't monsters or grotesque beings like you see in movies. They were elegant, almost fragile, their skin pale and faintly luminescent, their eyes large and dark, yet not threatening. The strangest part was the feeling that washed over me as I looked at them. It wasn't fear, it was connection, as if they had been waiting for me, specifically me, to arrive. My first instinct was to reach for the radio, but my hand froze halfway. Not because I was scared of what they'd do, but because some quiet voice inside told me that this moment wasn't meant to be interrupted, that trying to call it in would shatter whatever fragile bridge had just been formed. One of the beings raised a hand, not in a threatening gesture, but almost like a greeting. And when it did, a flood of impressions filled my mind. Not words exactly, but emotions, images, pieces of thought. I saw vast skies filled with unfamiliar constellations, towering cities of light that stretched into infinity, and something else, a desperate flight from danger. They weren't here to conquer or harm. They were running, hiding, seeking refuge. The realization struck me so hard I had to steady myself against a rock. These weren't invaders. They were fugitives. And somehow, in that moment, they were asking me, not the government, not the military, but me, for help. My training told me to stay rational, to observe, to document. But nothing in the academy prepared me for the weight of standing between worlds. Their eyes locked onto mine, and in that silent exchange I understood. If I chose to turn away, if I treated this like just another report to file, I'd be closing a door that might never open again for humanity. So I took a shaky breath, nodded slightly, and whispered into the night, "Okay, I'll listen." The instant I whispered those words, something changed in the air around me. The vibration in my chest deepened, almost like the ground itself was alive, resonating with the beings standing before me. The light surrounding them pulsed gently, and though no mouths moved, I felt their response as clearly as if it had been spoken: gratitude, relief, and an urgency I could barely process. They stepped closer, and I could see details I hadn't noticed before. Their skin wasn't just pale, it shimmered faintly, like moonlight caught on water. Their limbs were long, jointed differently than ours, allowing them to move with a grace that seemed impossible. And their eyes, they weren't just dark voids. They reflected shifting colors, almost like the northern lights, and staring into them made me feel both small and infinite at the same time. I wanted to ask them questions, but before I could even form the words, I felt the answers. Their ship, or whatever it was, wasn't just a craft. It was alive, in some sense, attuned to them, pulsing with their energy. And it had been damaged. Not here, but far from here, in the cold expanse of space. They had come to Earth not by choice, but out of necessity, seeking a place to repair, to hide, to escape something pursuing them. I saw flashes in my mind, vast dark shapes moving through star systems, predatory and relentless. Whatever was chasing them wasn't just a threat to them. It was a threat to anything in its path. For the first time, fear gripped me, not of the beings in front of me, but of what might eventually arrive following their trail. My thoughts spun wildly. How could I possibly help? I was just a small-town cop in an unremarkable corner of America. But they didn't seem to want grand solutions or impossible answers. What they wanted was simple: trust, silence, and time. They needed to remain unseen. They needed someone to keep their secret, at least until they could move on. The enormity of it weighed on me. My entire job revolved around reporting, documenting, ensuring nothing slipped through the cracks. And now I was standing face to face with something the world had been searching for, something people had killed and lied and fought over for decades. And they were asking me to protect it, to keep it hidden. I wanted to resist, to insist that this was too big for me, that it needed to go higher up, to the authorities, to scientists, to anyone but me. But deep down, I knew what would happen if I did. Humans fear what they don't understand. Curiosity can be cruel, and power even crueler. These beings weren't soldiers. They weren't conquerors. They were fragile, desperate, and carrying the weight of survival. If the wrong people found them, they wouldn't be offered help. They'd be studied, dissected, imprisoned. As if sensing my hesitation, one of them reached out, not touching me, but holding its hand just inches away. And in that moment, a warmth spread through me, like sunlight after days of storm. My doubts eased. My thoughts cleared. It wasn't manipulation. It felt more like reassurance, like someone telling you without words, you are not alone in this. Suddenly, the night wasn't cold anymore. The silence wasn't oppressive, it was peaceful. And I realized with startling clarity that my decision had already been made the moment I stepped out of the cruiser. I was already in this, already part of something far larger than I'd ever imagined. They moved back slightly, as if satisfied that I understood. The ship behind them pulsed brighter for a moment, and I noticed strange markings etched along its surface, shapes that shifted when I tried to focus on them, as if written in a language too complex for human eyes to grasp. I had the strangest feeling that if I stared long enough, I'd begin to understand, like the meaning was waiting just beneath the surface of my mind. But before I could sink deeper, one of the beings interrupted the thought with a glance, a gentle shake of its head. Not yet, the feeling said. Not time. My radio crackled suddenly, jolting me back into reality. Dispatch was calling, checking my status. My hand twitched toward it, instinct tugging me to answer, to ground myself in the ordinary routine. But I froze, eyes flicking back to the beings. The message was clear. They couldn't be discovered, not tonight. I let the radio buzz, unanswered, and the sound faded into static before cutting out entirely. The beings slowly retreated toward the ship, but not before one of them turned back, holding my gaze for what felt like a lifetime compressed into a second. Images filled me again, but this time they weren't cosmic visions or desperate pleas. They were personal. I saw myself standing years from now, older, still carrying this secret. I saw choices I hadn't made yet, paths I hadn't walked. And threaded through all of it was one constant: the unshakable truth of this night. That moment broke me in ways I can't fully explain. It was like looking at a version of my life where nothing ordinary would ever feel ordinary again. The ship's light intensified, surrounding them until they were nothing but silhouettes again. Slowly, silently, it lifted off the quarry floor, rising higher and higher until it hovered above the treetops. The vibration deepened, rattling my bones, and then, with a sudden flash that didn't burn but instead washed everything in a golden glow, it vanished, gone as if it had never been there. I was left standing alone in the quarry, the crickets chirping again, the wind rustling through the trees, the hum of reality returning like someone had turned the world back on. And for the first time in my career, I didn't know whether to write the truth or bury it forever. I stood there in the quarry for what felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes, staring at the empty space where the ship had been, my mind fighting between disbelief and the undeniable truth of what I had just witnessed. My training screamed at me to document everything, to call it in, to make a record before the details slipped away. But another voice, quieter yet far stronger, whispered that writing any of this down would destroy the fragile trust one had been given. I climbed back into my cruiser, hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The dashboard lights flickered again as the engine turned over, but this time they settled almost instantly, as if nothing unusual had happened. The radio was silent, no trace of the static that had haunted the air earlier. For a brief second, I wondered if I had imagined the entire encounter, if stress and exhaustion had conjured a hallucination out of the still night. But deep in my chest, where that vibration had once resonated, there remained a faint echo, a reminder that what I experienced had been real. The drive back into town felt longer than usual, every shadow along the roadside shifting in my peripheral vision, every glint of starlight reminding me of the impossible lights I had seen above the quarry. By the time I pulled into the station, dawn was just beginning to bleed into the horizon, painting the sky in soft pinks and oranges. The world looked unchanged, but I knew it wasn't. I walked inside, greeted by the familiar scent of stale coffee and the low murmur of tired voices. A couple of officers were swapping stories about uneventful patrols, laughing at some inside joke. Everything was normal, perfectly normal, and I felt like an intruder carrying a secret that could shatter their reality. When the sergeant asked me about my night, I opened my mouth, ready to say something. Anything, but the words caught in my throat. How do you tell someone that you've stood face to face with beings from another world? How do you explain that they weren't hostile, that they were desperate, that they entrusted you, of all people, with their survival? Instead, I forced a smile and muttered something about checking on a noise complaint near the quarry. He nodded, uninterested, and turned back to his paperwork. Just like that, the greatest secret of my life was buried beneath routine and small talk. The following days were a blur. I went through the motions of my job, but every quiet moment was haunted by flashes of that night. The shimmering skin of the beings, the living glow of their ship, the overwhelming sense of connection. Sleep became difficult. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, their eyes reflecting colors that didn't exist on Earth. Sometimes I woke in a cold sweat, convinced the golden light was seeping back into my room. And yet, despite the unease, a strange calm settled in me as well. I knew something others didn't, something that made every petty argument, every small-town squabble, seem insignificant. The world was bigger, stranger, more alive than anyone around me realized. Weeks passed before anything unusual happened again. It was late, just past midnight, when I was driving the same stretch of highway near the quarry. I told myself it was coincidence, that my route simply brought me past there again, but deep down I knew I was looking for them, hoping for some sign. That night, I found it. Not lights in the sky this time, but a faint hum vibrating through the steering wheel of my cruiser. I pulled over instinctively, stepping out into the still night. The stars above were sharp and endless, and for a moment I thought I saw one of them flicker unnaturally, darting against the grain of the constellations. But no ship appeared, no glowing figures emerged. Instead, the hum faded, leaving me with a heavy silence that felt both disappointing and comforting. They were still out there, somewhere, and they hadn't forgotten me. The real test came a month later. I was called to investigate a disturbance at a remote farmhouse near the forest's edge. The owners claimed strange lights had appeared above their barn, and their livestock were restless, refusing to settle. My heart raced as I drove out there, gravel crunching beneath the tires. Part of me hoped it was unrelated, that it was nothing more than spotlights or mischief. Another part of me feared it was connected, that the beings had returned and might be discovered by the wrong people. When I arrived, the family was huddled on their porch, eyes wide with fear. They swore they had seen orbs, bright as fire, circling low above the trees. I scanned the skies, but saw nothing unusual. The barn was quiet, the animals calm by the time I approached. I assured them it was probably atmospheric lights or passing aircraft, but inside, I knew better. The timing was too precise, the descriptions too familiar. They had been near, close enough to be seen, and they had chosen to move on before I arrived. Maybe they were reminding me that this wasn't over, that I was still part of their story whether I wanted to be or not. Driving back that night, I realized something that chilled me more than the encounter itself. I had started lying without hesitation. To my fellow officers, to the townsfolk, to the terrified family. I lied because the truth was too dangerous to share, and the ease with which I did it scared me. What else would I be willing to hide, to protect them? How far would I go? The longer I carried the secret, the heavier it became. Days turned into months, months into years, and though my life on the surface remained unchanged, tickets written, disputes settled, paperwork filed, the memory of that night never left me. I thought I could bury it, that with enough time it would fade into the haze of routine like every other strange call I'd ever answered. But it didn't. It grew inside me, shaping the way I looked at the world, the way I listened to people, even the way I breathed on quiet nights when the stars stretched overhead. Every time someone laughed about UFO sightings or scoffed at the idea of life beyond Earth, I bit my tongue, carrying the weight of knowing they were wrong. Not just wrong, but blind to the enormity surrounding us. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it all, that fatigue and darkness had played tricks on me, but deep down I knew the truth. And then, years later, the truth found me again. It was a summer night, hot and still, the kind where the air itself feels heavy. I was off duty, driving home after visiting a friend, when I saw it, a glimmer in the treetops near the quarry. At first, I thought it was lightning, a quick flash in the distance, but the glow lingered, shifting softly like liquid fire. My chest tightened with a familiar vibration, faint but undeniable. Without hesitation, I turned down the gravel road, tires crunching, heart hammering. When I reached the edge of the quarry, I killed the engine and stepped out. And there they were, waiting. Not many, just two this time, standing near the water's edge, their glow muted but unmistakable. They hadn't changed. Or maybe they had, in ways I couldn't perceive. But the moment I saw them, every doubt, every fear, every sleepless night dissolved into silence. I walked closer, not even thinking about what I would say, because words weren't needed. The same flood of impressions filled me, stronger now, clearer. They had survived. They had endured. And they had come back, not to stay, but to say goodbye. I felt it in my bones before I understood it in my mind. They weren't fugitives anymore. They had found somewhere else, somewhere safer, far beyond our reach. Earth had been only a temporary refuge, and I had been only a temporary guardian. But to them, that had mattered. To them, I had mattered. They wanted me to know they hadn't forgotten. One of them raised its hand again, just as it had years before, and warmth spread through me, a farewell without words. Images filled my vision one last time, not pursuit, not fear, but peace. A vast expanse of stars, a new beginning, the promise of survival. And then, just as before, the light enveloped them, pulsing brighter until it was impossible to see. The air trembled, the hum deepened, and in a final burst of golden brilliance, they were gone. This time, I knew it was final. I stood there long after the quarry was dark again. The night sounds creeping back, my heart both heavy and light. Heavy because I knew I would never see them again. Light because I had carried their secret, and it had meant something. Not just to them, but to me. I drove home in silence, the weight of years lifting off my shoulders, replaced with a strange peace I hadn't felt since that first encounter. I didn't need proof. I didn't need to tell anyone. The truth wasn't mine to share. It was mine to carry. And so I did. Even now, long after I hung up my badge and retired, I still feel their presence when I look at the stars. Not as fear, not as burden, but as a quiet reminder that the universe is alive with stories we may never hear, struggles we may never witness, beings we may never meet. Except I did. I met them. And no matter how ordinary the world tries to appear, I know the truth that lies just beyond our sight. We are not alone. We have never been alone. And sometimes the universe chooses the most unlikely person to hold that truth. On paper, I was just another small-town cop. In reality, for a fleeting moment, I was the bridge between worlds. That night changed nothing and everything all at once. And though I'll never hear that hum again, I'll carry it with me until the end of my days, knowing that in the quiet of one forgotten quarry, I was trusted with the most extraordinary secret of all.